Welcome back, adventurers, to another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Today, we're once again joined by Brady Sadler, a prolific author, game writer, and designer whose creative journey has been profoundly shaped by the power of music. From his immersive board games to the rich fantasy worlds of his novels, like The Withered Roots and Relic Myers and the Rhythms of Ruin, Brady intertwines melody and narrative to weave compelling tales. Brady, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's great to be back.
Well, congratulations on yet another book and another one coming soon. So, dude, you are prolific.
I made a really kind of like, it was fun at the time, but in retrospect, it was kind of stupid decision to, I guess more like ambition to release 2 novels this year. And when I finished the first Withered Roots, which just came out just this past Wednesday, I was waiting for the cover art, and it was making me just anxious because it took like 6 months. So it was a really complex piece, and the artist is a very busy guy. So during that wait, I was just going so crazy. I decided, I'm going to write a book before this next cover art's done because I wanted to do 2 books this year. Now's my chance. And I made a challenge at May 1st this year to write a whole book in a month, 100,000 words, which I don't recommend. I do not recommend it.
That sounds like a lot of work, let's be honest. Yeah. Although, I mean, writing, some days it's work, some days it's fun.
Yeah, they can go both ways, but it's the kind of work that I was made for. So like, there could be like hard work, your day job or whatever that makes you miserable, but that's the kind of hard work I was kind of made for. So I enjoyed it.
Right on. Okay, well, I've had you on the show before, so people can go back and listen and get your background. But give me a Cole's Notes so we have a foundation of your origin story, how you got into gaming and writing, your breaking into board games, your novel and video game work. Just give me a quick, well, not too quick, but take us through it.
Yeah, I tend to ramble, but I'll try to make it a little more truncated here. But I'm actually in front of my origins right here. Like, I'm kind of getting back into music again. This is what started it all for me. As a kid, I played a lot of video games and everything. Got a little bit into board games like Hero Quest and stuff, but it wasn't until music, oddly enough, that I got just off the rails, insanely obsessed with fantasy and just, stories and everything. So, but yeah, playing drums for metal bands. I started a band called Guard, which is a fantasy metal band. Fell into that just rabbit hole of European fantasy themed power metal, and it kind of got me into D&D and stuff. It's weird how that was my entry point. A lot of people write music based on stuff they're into, like they're into like D&D or whatever, so write music about it. It feels like the reverse for me, where I just like the music so much that I just started being obsessed with fantasy, and then got into Rhapsody, which is a ridiculously over the top Italian symphonic metal band, and they have a big story behind their music, and that's what made me start Lauren Gertz. I want to write a book and have a album based on this book. So that's kind of what got me into the path of where I am now. But I had a lot of sidetracks in doing board game design and corporate proposals, any kind of writing job I could get. But yeah, I think music was the catalyst, really.
Very cool. You got to pay the bills, man. You got to write to pay the bills. I get you.
True.
But you set the stage really well, because we're here to talk today about music and how it influences writing, not only how it intertwines into the narrative itself, but how what you're listening to or working on musically influences your actual process and craft. So you queued me up perfectly. You're like a pro.
I'm here for it. Yeah.
All right, well, let's start broad and bring it in. That's how I like to do this. So to start us off kind of broad, how has, as you hinted at, how has music played a pivotal role in your creative journey, including board games, fiction, game design? How has it steered you?
It's weird to articulate this because it was a very pivotal moment when I was in probably junior year of high school. I was in a lot of cover bands. My main band at the time just played a lot of Metallica covers. So I was really entrenched in 80s thrash and stuff that came a little before my time, because I'm not like old enough to have like lived through the thrash heydays. It was kind of more retroactive look at it from the late 90s. But I was really obsessed with Metallica, and there was one song that I kept coming back to. It was called "The Thing That Should Not Be" off their Master of Puppets album. And I don't know why that one song always just kind of fascinated me from a lyrical standpoint, because it's not that deep. Like, you read the lyrics, just like, it's not super deep. It's kind of just mysterious and very Cthulhu oriented, which at the time I didn't know what that was. So that probably helped. But that fascination with that, something about the music that evoked my imagination, just wanting to know what that thing that should not be was. And this kind of the magic behind these stories or mythologies behind this really cool music that I like to play. You know, I just like to play drums to it, but at the same time, there was all these other layers to unravel. So I think that moment right there, like getting obsessed with that one song for some reason, really set me off the deep end, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was that I wanted. And it wasn't until I discovered, you know, what I mentioned before, the fantasy themed power metal in Europe that was really big. It wasn't until I got into that genre that I figured out who I was, like, creatively, that this is what I was meant for. So, but I always go back to that one song for some reason. I think it's that fascination of giving you a little bit of mystery, and like the music itself can be interpreted in so many different ways. So that's kind of the beauty of it, where the listener kind of makes up their own mythologies in their head. If you just give them a little bit, you know, they can fill in the gaps.
Very cool. So music, and like you're talking about it, it's part of the process, but it also influences us as writers. Like when you sit down to write something, you're like, okay, I got to write something dark and spooky. You'll put on something that matches to put you in the mood or to influence what's coming out. Can you think of a specific instance in your writing career or in your path where what you were listening to directly influenced the tone or atmosphere of the narrative you were creating, and sometimes perhaps unexpectedly?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I don't have a set method. I know there's some writers will have these rituals where they'll have a soundtrack on or something. I'm kind of weird where, like, I'll be watching How I Met Your Mother on Hulu, and I'll just have an epiphany, want to write a chapter really quick, you know, with that in the background. But there were a few instances I remember vividly when my first novel, Eve of Corruption, which came back 12 years ago, back in 2012. I was writing that for almost like 5 years, all through college and a little bit afterward. But I was sitting at Panera one time and I had my headphones in, and I was just trying to get in this mindset of like just heroics, you know, just like heroism. It was like this part in the story where I was trying to be inspired by big epic scenes, like cinematic scenes. And that was the first time I had ever thought, like, you know, I'm going to put on some soundtrack music because, you know, maybe that'll help me. And I remember putting on, I think it was I can't say for sure which movie. It was either Superman 1 or Superman 2, that Richard Donner soundtrack. You know, it's like that stuff did it for me, where it was like that really powerful, you know, heroic, triumphant type music. That really set the scene for me in that particular chapter I was working on. And I can't even remember exactly right now, like if I was going back to that book, what scene that was. I just remember vividly the music itself really helped me, you know, finish the idea I had. So that's definitely one that sticks out to me to this day.
Very cool. Did you listen to anything specific while working on Relic Myers? Like, is there anything that you were putting on over and over again to get you in that mood?
Yeah, like during the Relic Myers process, which you'll see back here, the cover art was kind of me when I was a chubby 15 playing drums. That was like, there's very much autobiographical stuff going on in that book. So I was revisiting a lot of the stuff that I listened to because it's referenced very heavily in the story. Like the story itself, it's like Hammerfall, for example, the Swedish metal band Hammerfall, big influence on me. They got me really deep into power metal early on. So I made, obviously, Relic Myers was set in 1997 when I was the same age and I was experiencing this transition. So that was definitely something I went back and listened to, because when I wrote from Relic's point of view, when he first discovered some of this stuff, I had to remind myself how I felt. And I mean, anytime I hear that music, I automatically put back to when I first heard it. So it's very easy for me to turn that on, close my eyes, and picture myself being like a 14, 15, 16-year-old kid discovering the stuff for the first time. So it was kind of different where I wouldn't sit and write to it, but I'd have the CD next to me, like the album cover. So if I'm writing along, I'll look over at it and think about what Relic's thinking about when he's seeing this cover. So it's just very much being enmeshed in all the aesthetics surrounding the music too, not just the music itself, you know, like just the atmosphere of it. So yeah, that's a great example of what music I have to rely heavily on just to get my sense of belonging, you know, back there in that time.
Very cool. Apart from the atmosphere and setting tone and getting into that headspace, music can also kind of, the process of creating music can change how we write. So for instance, as a drummer, your background in heavy metal, you work with Lauren Gard. Have you learned things from the process of writing musical structures and lyrical structures that have influenced how you write narratives?
Yeah, I think subconsciously. I mean, it really didn't come to a head until I was working on this Relic Myers book, which was the most recent one we were discussing that I wrote in just May this year. That one, there's a lot about the plot of, and it's hard not to give up too much away spoiler wise, but the plot is very much structured around a song. So like there's this specific song in the story, and it references parts of it, like the intro is like a certain atmosphere to it. It's like it describes the tom rhythms, very ritualistic. So being a drummer, like that comes very naturally to me. It's kind of my language where I'm speaking to somebody who might also either be a drummer or familiar with drum, vocabulary to nomenclature and stuff. So I try to make it layman's terms where other people can understand it, but drummers will appreciate it more probably.
Right.
But speaking to the actual parts and how they affect how Relic's thinking, like what dire situations are happening around him. I like, at least for me when I'm writing it, hopefully who somebody reads it will get that same vibe, but it feels like you're following the song structure when you're discovering different parts of the story. It's like discovering parts of the song as well. So it does really become more tangible in this kind of story that I'm writing. But I think in other stories, it's like that creative process where you get a skeleton down, you get the vision of what you want, and you start to see it take shape, the skeleton and the flesh and everything on top. It's sort of a subconscious thing. I think that if you've done both, then you probably can't articulate exactly like what's similar, what's not, but it just makes it easier for you to press forward, not to get hung up and distracted. You just keep moving forward with that creative motion, essentially.
Yeah. I think writers use a lot of different narrative structures as frameworks to help us create things so we have something to work from. Like once you know them, you can spin off and do weird things and twist them and play with them, but it's important to know them so you have a basis. And I think the narrative structure to a lyrical, whether it's your classic, chorus and refrain and bridge and all that, and or whether you're more like Tool, prog rock, where it's wandering all over the bloody place, it's still a structure. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I was lucky enough to be an early reader of Relic Myers. And I'm not a musician, despite the fact that I tried really hard when I was a teenager, but I did manage a band for years. I did live with the band I managed. So I was very deep in that culture, in that world. I was part of the process, and reading the book felt like we were back in the basement with the band. Like there were so many things where I was like, oh yeah, we were there. We lived that, like minus the cool, freaky stuff that I'm not going to spoil either. But like, yeah, it felt like reading a song. Like you could feel the structure, the refrains, reoccurrence, the chorus, like it was still in there, and the bass and the drums, there was a match there to the beats, the story beats. It felt like a musician wrote the book. Like, so it's cool to see that.
That's great to hear. Yeah. It's, I think it goes back to that whole subconscious thing too, because even because I'm in the process of editing right now, so I'm still very deep in the story. I'm like halfway through my rewrites and everything. But in my second wave through, like I'm starting to notice stuff that you're saying right now that I didn't think about when I was writing it. It's because it's subconscious. You don't plan it. It just happens because you're ripping your heart out and showing people. You're taking your mind and dumping it onto this paper. But it is like there's moments where it'll bring up like the intro of the song that's referenced in the story, but it comes back later on too. And it's almost like you're playing through a song, you're hearing the intro, but it comes back later on and you're hearing like as a refrain down there, lifting that. And it's like, I didn't plan that, but man, that's cool how it works out that way. It's very natural.
My family's a huge fan of musical theater. Like we're all involved. My kids do it. We have tickets to all the shows that come up here to Canada. And I think musical theater is a beautiful blend of narrative, lyric, and music. Like the way they use refrains and callbacks and build on things as time goes on. And I think there's a lot we can learn as long form fiction writers from musical theater, and as narrative designers and video game writers that we can learn from musical theater. It's a field that needs to be studied more, in my opinion.
I agree. Yeah, completely. Yeah, I'm a huge fan as well. I feel like that's one of my minor regrets in life was like not discovering that earlier on, like, getting involved in drama or theater. I encourage my daughter to, because she's really into that side of things. My wife is a stagehand, so she was always on the backside, but she was always involved in it. Yeah. Kind of like I mentioned, like being, managing a band, you're still, even if you don't play an instrument, you still know that atmosphere. You know what it's like to be in a band. And it's the same thing with theater, where it's like, if you're working around that, it's almost like you're in theater, you're on stage almost, because you're just around that atmosphere and that creative energy.
100%. One more thing I'm just curious about, touching back to the band. When you were in Lorengard working on the music, were you one of the were you writing lyrics and writing music, or how did the band, I'm just curious, how did the band come up with their songs?
Yeah, it was a very coordinated effort, but our guitar player, Chris Cruz, he's just like a master class. He's an amazing drummer, an amazing guitarist. Yeah, he he was a drummer for this band, Demirkis, that got signed to Metal Blade Records, and they toured all over the place. So like early on in Lorngard's like career, we had to take a bit of a hiatus while he was off on tour. So we would end up writing songs with a different set of people, while he was off doing that. But when he came back, that's before Eva Corruption hit. When he came back, we finally got back together. But our writing methods would always be him bringing in these riffs, because he would get so inspired by, all these different band songs. He'd love to take apart guitar parts, the arpeggios and stuff, and just make huge melodic pieces just on guitar. And we'd have to kind of piece things together from there. We'd be build it, because he's a drummer too, so he speaks that language. So we'd be me and him would coordinate the drum parts together. The lyrics were always kind of my domain until Rob, our singer at the time, came in. He was one of the latest members to join. But when he came in, he kind of put his own spin on the lyrics based on the stories that I was, putting in the book. So early on, I did all the lyrics, but then when Rob came, we kind of collaborated more. I would just give him the themes. I would name the songs and say what this is about, and then he would put his own spin on the vocal melodies and then the lyrics. So it was a very collaborative process, but I would say, I'm a very humble person in this regard, where I would say Chris was probably the primary songwriter. He'd come in with 90% of these ideas, music stuff. At the time, I couldn't write any music. I'm just now getting to the point where I can write music on piano, I'm actually writing my own music. But at the time, I was a drummer. I just hit things really fast is all I did.
I was actually going to ask if you're writing anything, because my little brother's a musician, and every time I talk to him, that's my first question is, are you writing?
Yeah, I'm trying. I took vocal lessons earlier this year because I've always wanted to sing, but I've always just been tone deaf. So I can kind of hold a tune now, and I've never been ambitious enough to be an impressive singer. More just I want to be able to record stuff that I write and make it not sound awful, actually sound on key. But my goal is, and I won't make any kind of promises or guarantees. But in Relic Myers, his dad, the character Relic, his dad Steven, is the drummer for this band called Unknown Oath, who was a late 80s thrash band. And my goal is to write the actual music that the Unknown Oath plays, and release it, in real life as promotional stuff for the book. But I don't know if I'm that good yet. I'll see how it goes. But I've started the main song, the main song in the story is Alternus, which is this really crazy. There's a really crazy story behind that song that's part of the plot. I won't give it away, but I'm working on that song right now because it's mostly drum driven. It's obviously, why it's a drum song, go figure. But that's my first project.
I want to hear it. You got to send it to me later.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Okay, I want to keep digging into this narrative stuff, but looking at your shelf, it kind of popped in my head, and I got to ask: has your writing as music and listening to music and what you've learned from creating music and playing music, has it influenced your board game design at all? Because we're talking about your writer side here today, but you're also a published and well-known board game designer.
Yeah, I've done a few board games, and I think the way my brain works is this happened to music too, because it always comes back to these themes, the narrative around something. And I think that's what drew me to board games originally, is because I got deep into music, and from there I got to these stories. But games were a way to explore world building in a different way, a more interactive way. But coming into the creative side of creating board games, it was a similar process where, I mean, this goes with anything I'm into. If I'm into something enough, I'm going to want to make it. I just have this curse in that regard. It's oh, I like music, I better be in a band. I like reading books, I better write a book. And I like playing games, I better make some games. But I approached it in a very similar way with music, where every song that we would ever write in Lorngard, I'd be what part of the story is this about? What are we trying to capture? Is it a big battle, triumphant song, or is it a sad song? So with games, it was always okay, I want to make this type of game. I don't care about the mechanics at all. What's the game going to be? Am I going to be a cop busting criminals and a buddy cop GTA style vibe? Then I make a game around that to support the theme. So I'm not the most thoughtful or articulate game designer, because I always use mechanics as a way to just carry the theme, just to get from point A to point B, just figuring out the easiest way to get players involved in this theme without getting it too bogged down in these complex mechanics.
Very cool. I want to run a D&D game. I want you to be a bard, and I'm going to give you a stomp box, so you can just sit there and
I'll do my best.
That'd be fun. All right. Oh, let's go back to narrative and writing for a bit here. You mentioned fantasy worlds and world building. How does music influence world building for you? Have you ever, created a culture in a world that was based around music? Is music something that you take into consideration when building fantasy worlds? Like, is that because when I sit down to do world building, politics come to mind first, and magic systems come to mind, and combat systems, and that kind of stuff, and ecology and all that. But music is not on the top. Like I'll introduce culinary arts before I start worrying about the music of cultures and worlds and what the elves listen to versus the dwarves. Is that part of your world building process?
It's weird because it's like it comes and goes, because originally, like I said, I never considered myself a musician when I just played drums. It's like I wanted to be a musician, but I'm just like a guy that can I can stay on beat and I can hit things fast, and and I can spin my sticks and make it look cool. But like I didn't consider myself a musician in that regard. So like early on, it was always that primitive thing, because like when I just played drums, I just focused on rhythms. I was always fascinated by just like the primitive nature of that, like playing in ritualistic beats and stuff, like on whatever types of instruments you can find. I always thought about it in that regard, where if I'm creating a culture, music wouldn't be the forefront, but it'd always be somewhere. I think about like, okay, is this like a tribal type people that they use drums still, or they have stringed instruments? So it would be very kind of, I guess, superficial in that regard early on, but since I started like learning theory, piano and stuff, you might see that if you read my newest book, Withered Roots, there's a lot of music in that, like because
Nice.
the main character, different culture, a different area. It's a mixture of like Egyptian and like I don't know, like I try to do a lot of mixing of different like cultures and histories in this setting, but in this particular place, music is a much more prominent piece of the culture than in just like where there's bards traveling around playing their tambourines and their lutes and stuff. This was much more organized. So yeah, it's kind of like growing for me, where whatever I'm into in the real world is going to trickle over into my world building in other worlds.
Very cool. When you read a lot of classical fantasy, the idea of orcs and their drums and dwarves and their drums, like that primal earth grounded sound of drums and rhythm and beats. I think I've read like maybe one fantasy world that I can't remember now, where it was the elves that were drums. But I'm curious, what do you think of those kind of stereotypes where we imbue the character of a whole culture or race or chunk of the world based on the kind of music, and whether it's rhythm versus melody or woodwinds versus percussions? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Like for me personally, I'm like, I've read this line between like trying to subvert certain established tropes while also kind of respecting the tropes that I like. Like I came into fantasy and I really liked kind of the generic fantasy. I really appreciated, like, even though some people are like, oh, so much Tolkien in this, this is like Tolkien knockoff. I like that's what got me into fantasy. So I always want to kind of respect that because I liked it, but also like subvert a little bit as well. So I will have a little bit of both, I think, where I'll have, if I have, like, for example, in the Malice of Light world, the half orcs they're not really a primitive culture. It's more just they're recovering from a horrible cataclysm, essentially, that tried to turn them into monsters. Because in this world, orcs are monsters. They're not like people. They're just monsters. Mm-hmm. And this cataclysm came and tried to turn this whole culture, these whole like hunters and gatherers, into orcs. But they were so willful and so powerful, they resisted most of it. But some of them still twisted to like these half orcs. So they're sort of like a rebuilding culture, essentially. So it still has a little bit of that like primitive aspect, but I try to subvert it a little bit by making it, they might have different types of music traditions. And it's not just the typical, like, hunter ritualistic drum beats.
Yeah. Very cool. I love the world building stuff. Like that's the stuff that gets me going. Yeah, and there's so many tools we can add to our toolbox. Like, so music is another wonderful, powerful tool. I love it.
Yeah, you can. That's the beauty of it too. It's like one time I might not think too much about music, but when I do, that's like a whole other road to go down and then explore and like kind of flesh out all the ones that are already, all the cultures that already exist in this world. It's like, okay, what's the music like for each of these? And it's just fun.
Yeah, 100%, buddy. So you mentioned Relic Myers and how there's a song that kind of is a thread throughout the whole thing. I'm curious. Why do I say that all the time? I'm curious.
You're a curious guy.
I'm a curious. That's why I have a podcast. Have you ever seen or done yourself where a whole character's arc has been built because of a song, whether it's your own song or a song you've heard, or like, has it ever been done? Like,
You know, I think that's what fascinated me the most is why I felt like I had to write this story because, you know, like I said before, May 1st, I'm like, I'm going to write a book. And I had a few I wanted to do. Like I could even start the next Malice Light book, but I did 2 fantasy epics. So I was like, I want to do something different. And the reason this one kept jumping out at me is because like it's been in my head for like 5 years, but I never sat and wrote it. It's more just kind of been these like different ideas jumping back and forth. But I think that's what kind of fascinated me is because this kid, like Relic Myers, to me is he's one of the most powerful things I've ever made creatively. And like, I think a lot of this too, because it's like, it's so autobiographical. It's like so much of myself, like my personal self-discovery, like as a, you know, embodied in this, personified in this person. But I think what you mentioned there, like about just a song making this character, like not to get into spoiler territory because the story is like very much about this, but like the plot that kind of jumped out at me was like, I was a character that was created when I think I was like 15 years old when I first got my first Hammerfall album, and I was a different person. But when I got that album, like the way I am today, that's when I was created. I was created on that day when I got that album. That was like, I wanted to recreate that as a fictional character, and that's what Relic Myers is. I want, like, he's pretty much just like of how I viewed my transition essentially. So, and that was like one song that did that to me, like in real life. One song, I heard a song and something about it was like, whoa, I had never knew this existed, you know, and I had to discover more like that. So that like that, what do you call that? When you have a caterpillar turning into metamorphosis, right?
There we go. Yeah.
Metamorphosis is like, that's what I wanted to capture with this character. So it is kind of like that, where there's a fictional song that is in Relic Myers, but in a lot of ways, it's that Hammerfall song I heard, which is, if anyone's wondering, it's Heeding the Call, the first track of Legacy of Kings. That's what slapped me in the face and kind of woke me up to some real music. but yeah, it's kind of along those lines where it was just this concept of a song creating this character and this person, like like my life choices.
You touch on something so powerful, man. The fact that music often for humans sets bookmarks for milestones. Like you can think of, you hear a song, you know what you were doing the first time you heard that. If it's an important song, you go to a place, you'll remember, oh yeah, that song was playing when I was here with my wife the first time we danced, or the first time we kissed, or like me and my wife just went back to Vegas for our 15-year anniversary because that's where we got married. And we're walking down the street and there was a song playing on the radio and I had to stop. And I'm like, oh my God, that's the song the guy was playing on the harmonica in front of Bellagio when we were dancing on the Strip. Like, and it's 15 years later and I will always remember that Richard Marx song now because of that. And
nice.
So grabbing that and embedding that into fiction is so powerful. And using that to drive stories or to create resonance, like build that emotional connection. So that's why, in my opinion, Relic feels so authentic. He's your story, he's part of you, but there's something that's real there that's so cool.
Yeah, and I think that touches on also, like, you know, we haven't talked about the whole, like, the writing process aspect, but I think, like, part of that, because, you know, I'm very active on social media, so I post what I'm doing a lot, and I was posting a lot during the month, the novel in a month ordeal. I was writing 3,000 words a day, so I was pretty much reporting on all my progress on social media, and I get lots of comments like, oh my God, I cannot believe you're doing this, like, this is incredible, how do you stay so productive? But what I can't articulate to people is, like, it is work, like, it is challenging to do. I have to force myself to do it, but at the same time, like, so much of this stuff is like dying to get out of me, you know? It's like this particular story, I've never had such an organic creation process, you know? And I've had like a lot of beta readers, like more than ever for this one. And I think it's because fantasy's trickier because there's a lot of fantasy out there and it's a big ask for somebody to like learn this fantasy world. And my fantasy is a lot of characters, just tons of characters in my stories. I apologize, but this was a challenge for me too, because like this was just one viewpoint. Like this is all told through Relic Myers. It's a third person close. So it's third person through following Relic Myers. My other books are all third person with tons of point of views, kind of like Game of Thrones. Yeah. So that was another challenge, whereas I'm just telling it from this point of view. But because of that, I've gotten a lot of people volunteering for beta reads because they usually don't want to read my complex stuff, I guess. But now they're like, oh, I could read this one, you know. But all this feedback I'm getting is like, they're like, Ned, this is like the best thing you've ever written. This is so great. And part of me is like, screw you, have you read Withered Roots? But the other part of me is like, I know it's because it's so authentic. It's like there's it's all face value stuff. You're just reading someone's very like concisely laid out emotions. It's an easy read, and that's coming from the guy who wrote it. In a month, it's still easy.
It's good, and it's got some twists and a couple gut punches, and it may feel like an easy read, but it's going to surprise you. So
glad you're digging.
I can't wait. I can't wait to see the final product, man.
Awesome.
Okay, well let's start bringing this to rest here, bringing it to close. Let's wrap the whole thing up. I guess my big question at the end to kind of encapsulate this whole thing is, in your opinion, can music, whether it's the process, whether it's a single song, whether it's a structure, but can it serve as a primary catalyst for building something, whether it's world building, a story arc, a novel, an actual video game, a piece? Can a music be the primary catalyst for the rest of the creative process?
1,000%. Yeah, 1,000%. And like sort of an exhibit of this is, you might not have finished Relic Myers yet, but you've probably noticed a particular Madonna song that's in that story. There is something, and another thing of my beta readers, toward the end of the book, there's a scene where like the majority of my beta readers said, this scene is amazing. This is perfectly done. This is such a great, powerful scene. And it's funny because that one scene at the toward the end of the book is the very first thing that I thought of when I was thinking about this story. So the story was getting to this scene. It's like, I wanted to like write this scene. I visualized it, and it's a Netflix movie or something. It's like, I wanted that scene to be done. So it involved Madonna's Open Your Heart. And I'm not sure why, like, cause as a kid, that was a popular song when I was younger. So there might've been several occurrences where that song might just stuck in my, the back of my brain somewhere, never went away. But because of that one emotion that song would always awaken in me, I wrote that entire book to get to that point, essentially. So I don't think this book would exist if it wasn't for needing to get that scene, give it a home, give it a place to live.
That's so cool. Right on. And I'm glad that you did, buddy.
Yeah, me too. It's a relief. It's like one less thing to worry about.
Okay, man. Well, that brings us to the end of the core stuff. But before we start heading towards the door, there's a couple things I like to do. You've answered my core question before, but it's been 6 months almost. So I'm gonna ask you again. I'm gonna see if it's different this time, if you've matured perhaps, or you've had some different thoughts on the process. But the question is, as you've heard before, in my opinion, there's a magical space at the intersection of story and game, fiction, acting, comedy, drama, musical theater, all these things where we can all just get together, hang out, naturally get along. If you agree with me, and not everybody does, but if you do, what is the magical thread that holds all this together?
I forget what I answered with last time. Knowing me, I probably just rambled without really answering. But I think I prepared a little more for this one because and it might be due to my recent experiences, but I think what it boils down to is self-discovery, which goes back to, experiences and characters and everything. But like at the same time, you're always trying to find the reason humans like stories. They're trying to find themselves. They want to find themselves in that story. Whether or not they want to like make their ideal character and fulfill their player power fantasy and whatever story. It's that self-discovery. It's like, even if you know what you want to be or know what you want to do, like doing that in a different setting might expose you to different ways of who that person is, who you think you are. So I think self-discovery is what it really comes down to.
Nice. Good answer. And no, that's new. I haven't heard that one before, so you could not have said that last time.
Awesome.
Okay, well, we're going to rip into the quickfire, but before we do, I just popped into my head. You're kicking ass at writing it. I love it. It's fantastic. And I know you're kicking at doors at narrative design every now and then. But are there board games still coming from Brady?
Yeah, there are board games. Yeah. So I forget if we talked last time when the most recent one was Steamforged Games picked up Street Masters, which is one of our biggest games. So that one's going to be delivering soon. They're doing like a whole revamp. So it's kind of reboot the line. But I'm meeting with them at Gen Con this year. So we'll see what else is in store. But yeah, always an option because I don't think we really get tired of games.
You're meeting me at Gen Con too, buddy. Just saying.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, let's do some quick fire. I think I got some different ones for you to this time around, so let's hit it. What do you listen to when you're writing?
Sitcoms, if anything. Usually I like silence, but yeah, I like sitcoms too if I'm editing or something.
Cool. What band today do you feel is overrated?
It's a good question. I guess I would just have to say Taylor Swift. And nothing against Taylor Swift, but I feel like she's got to be overrated because I hear about it all the time.
It's some pretty huge hype. I would agree. Whether or not it's overrated, I can't say. But it's some pretty. Who do you think is underrated right now?
Nickelback. Just because I hate how popular it is to hate Nickelback. Even though, like, I don't like, I'm kind of indifferent mostly Nickelback, but I feel like the hate is just still, it makes it so it's like I kind of want to like them more than I do just because they get so much hate.
Oh, you picked the wrong person for that particular topic. I'm from Alberta, dude. I saw Nickelback when they were still in basements, and their first two albums were incredible and groundbreaking, and they changed the whole genre. But then they just kept doing the same thing over and over again.
They did again, yeah. But Leader of Men, I think, was the one that I heard before I broke out. I loved that song. It was great.
So good. Yeah, that album was incredible. Anyways, I would agree with you. I still love Nickelback. They have a close place in my heart. I just got frustrated they kept doing the same thing. But
yeah, I could respect that. Yeah.
What author do you wish the world knew more about? Who's a good hidden gem?
This might be a weird response because I think he's pretty popular, but David Erickson, he's had quite a bit of success, but I think people give up on him too easily because his first book, it's like very divisive, but like I read that thing like 4 or 5 times, and it's like every time I read it, it's like, this is just so good.
Cool. Yeah, no, I would agree. People don't talk about him a lot, but you're right. He's definitely one of the big ones. So
I need to know more indie authors to help boost up, but that's what came to mind.
That's a good one. Fantastic. All right, last quick fire. This one's a little trickier. If your essence was perfectly distilled down and then injected into a game, what race and class would you be?
Halfling rogue every time.
It really wasn't very hard.
No, I'm obsessed with halflings. If you read the Malice of Light, it'll be very apparent. But if there was like a class that was like half ranger, half rogue, like that's kind of where I usually sit. But rogue's kind of more, I kind of lean more toward rogue in most games. So.
Oh,
it's causing problems.
That raises the question: do you prefer the traditional halflings, hairy foot, or more of the modern 4th edition, 5th edition halflings?
I kind of prefer like a middle ground. I do like the big hairy foot, but like I kind of like I like the proportions where most of them still wear shoes, but they're just big feet, But I have to lean more toward the big hairy feet as opposed to just the short kids with the regular size feet.
Right on.
You have some bulky proportions to make it halfling,
Here we are discussing the important things, the heady matters. All right. Well, I think that's it, my friend. Before we head for the door, though, I do like to open up a little space. Is there anything you want to boost, signal boost, highlight? What you got going on? What's coming out? You got lots.
Yeah, I got lots. Right now, I'm really pushing the Withered Roots, which just came out that past Wednesday. It's book 2 in the Malice of Light, which is my planned 6-book fantasy series. If you like, traditional high fantasy, but with like a little bit of a more modern viewpoint on a lot of, like more inclusion, more just, same tropes, but just a more modern view on them. Check this out. It's got great reviews. For book 1's been pretty praised. Need some reviews for book 2, so pick it up, review it. Tell me what you like it, and then watch out for the fall because Halloween comes around. You'll want to read Relic Myers. It'll be perfect time for it.
Yep, I'm there. All right, buddy. Time for me to push you out into the cold. But before we go, as you walk through the door, I'm going to give you the last word. Any parting words of wisdom?
Check out Frozen Crown. I've been liking them a lot lately. So, really cool Italian metal band. Thanks to anybody who picks up my book or reads my book or reviews my book. Means a lot. Indie authors have it pretty tough. So if you don't pick up The Withered Roots, maybe go pick up another indie book, support another indie author. It's going to make their day. So.
Well, as the last embers in the hearth dwindle and the tavern doors reluctantly close, we must bid farewell, and I have to send you out into the wilds. But first, Brady, thank you for sharing your profound insights into the symbiotic relationship between music and creativity. Listener, thank you for taking your seat at the table. Until we meet again, remember, keep exploring, creating, and sharing your stories with the world. Stay safe out there, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the Corner of Story and Game.